The flames had already consumed half of Lila Zimmerman's bakery when Frank Zeller rode into Jerome Junction, Arizona territory, that suffocating August night in 1883. The orange glow visible from 3 miles out across the desert scrub. He had been heading home from a cattle drive, bone-weary and covered in trail dust, when he saw the inferno lighting up the darkness like a beacon of destruction. Without thinking, he spurred his horse toward the chaos, though by the time he arrived the volunteer fire brigade had already formed their bucket line from the town well. Frank dismounted and threw himself into the effort, passing water buckets until his shoulders burned and his hands blistered, but it was clear to everyone watching that nothing could be saved. The two-story building that had housed both Lila's thriving bakery on the ground floor and her modest living quarters above was being devoured by flames that seemed to have an insatiable hunger. He caught glimpses of a woman in a soot-stained dress being restrained by the town doctor as she screamed and fought to run back inside, her face contorted with anguish that cut straight through to his soul. By dawn, only the brick chimney and parts of the stone foundation remained standing, everything else reduced to smoldering ruins and ash. Frank stayed through the night, helping ensure the fire did not spread to neighboring buildings, and as the sun rose over the Verde Valley, he finally got a clear look at the woman whose life had just been torn apart. Lila Zimmerman stood motionless before the wreckage, her dark hair hanging loose and singed at the ends, her dress ruined, her face streaked with tears and soot. She was perhaps 25 years old, and even in her devastation, there was something striking about her, a quiet strength in the way she held herself despite obviously being destroyed inside. The town doctor, an elderly man named Henderson, stood beside her with a hand on her shoulder, speaking softly, but she seemed not to hear him at all. "Lost her husband to pneumonia just 8 months back," someone said near Frank, and he turned to see the mercantile owner, a heavy-set man named Prout. "Poor woman's been working herself near to death trying to keep the bakery going alone. Now this. She's got nothing left. Not even the insurance papers, they burned up inside too." Frank felt something twist in his chest as he watched her finally sink to her knees in the dirt, her hands covering her face. He had seen plenty of hardship in his 32 years, had lost his own parents to cholera when he was barely grown, but something about witnessing this woman's complete devastation moved him in a way he could not quite explain. He was a practical man, a cowboy who worked various ranches around the territory, never staying in one place too long, never putting down roots. He had a small cabin about 5 miles outside Jerome Junction that he returned to between jobs, but he had always been content with his solitary existence. Yet standing there in the acrid smoke and morning light, watching Lila Zimmerman's world crumble, he felt an unfamiliar pull toward another human being, an inexplicable need to do something, anything, to help. The town rallied around Lila in the immediate aftermath. The boarding house owner, Mrs. Patterson, offered her a room free of charge for 2 weeks. The church took up a collection that raised $47. People brought her clothes and toiletries, offered words of comfort and casseroles, but Frank could see in her eyes over the following days that she was simply going through the motions. He found himself riding into town more often than necessary, always finding some excuse to pass by where the bakery had stood, and he would see her there, standing amid the ruins, staring at what remained as if trying to will it back into existence. It was on the 4th day after the fire that Frank finally approached her. She was picking through the debris, salvaging bent nails and hinges, anything that might have some small value. Her hands were wrapped in bandages, and he noticed she moved stiffly, as if injured. "Madam," he said, removing his hat. "Name's Frank Zeller. I was here the night of the fire." She looked up at him with eyes that were dull with grief. "I don't remember much from that night. Thank you for helping. I suppose everyone who came helped save the rest of the town." "I've been thinking," Frank said, the words coming out rougher than he intended. "I'm a fair hand with carpentry. Built my own cabin, helped construct barn raisings, that sort of thing. I'd like to help you rebuild." Lila stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "That's kind of you, Mr. Zeller, but I have no money to pay for labor. The collection the church took up will barely cover my immediate needs. I cannot afford to rebuild, not properly. I've been thinking perhaps I should leave Jerome Junction, try to find work as a cook somewhere, maybe Prescott or even Phoenix." "I'm not asking for pay," Frank said firmly. "I'm offering my labor free of charge. I've got some savings, enough to buy lumber and supplies. Consider it a loan if that makes you feel better. Pay me back when you can." Her eyes filled with tears and she looked away quickly. Why would you do that for a stranger? Frank had asked himself the same question a dozen times. He shifted his weight, feeling awkward under her scrutiny. "Because it's the right thing to do. Because you shouldn't have to lose everything twice. First your husband, now your livelihood. If I can help prevent you from having to give up your home too, then I want to do that." "This town is my home," she said softly, looking around at the ruined foundation. "Thomas and I came here 5 years ago with nothing but a wagon and a dream. We built that bakery from the ground up. He died before he could see it truly prosper, and I've been working so hard to keep his dream alive, to make something he would have been proud of." Her voice broke. "And now it's all gone. Every brick he laid, every board he nailed, all our memories, everything." Frank felt that twist in his chest again. "Then let me help you build new memories, better ones. A fire can't destroy what you and your husband meant to each other, and it does not have to destroy your future either." She studied his face for what felt like an eternity, and Frank found himself hoping she would say yes with an intensity that surprised him. Finally, she nodded slowly. "I don't know how I could ever repay such kindness, but if you're truly willing to help, then yes, I accept. Though I insist this is a loan, Mr. Zeller. Every penny you spend I'll repay once I'm back on my feet." "Deal," Frank said, extending his hand. When she placed her bandaged hand in his, even through the cloth wrapping, he felt a warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with the Arizona sun. Over the next few days, Frank made plans. He rode to Prescott, the territorial capital, and used most of his savings to purchase lumber, nails, tools, and supplies. He arranged for everything to be freighted to Jerome Junction, which would take about a week. In the meantime, he helped Lila clear away the debris from the fire, sorting through the ruins for anything salvageable. They found her cast iron oven, damaged but potentially repairable. They found some of her baking tins, warped by heat but still usable. They found the metal cash box that had held her savings, melted shut with whatever money had been inside transformed to slag. As they worked side by side in the Arizona heat, they talked. Frank learned that Lila had grown up in Missouri, the daughter of a wheat farmer. She had married Thomas Zimmerman when she was 18, and they had headed west, seeking opportunity and adventure. Thomas had been a baker's apprentice in Kansas City before the war, and Lila had learned the trade from him. They had been happy in Jerome Junction, welcomed by the community, and the bakery had become the heart of the town's social life. People gathered there each morning for fresh bread and gossip, and Lila's sweet rolls had become locally famous. "I used to make 100 rolls every Sunday," she said, staring at the ruined foundation. "People would line up before dawn. Thomas always said I had a magic touch with yeast and dough. I don't know if I believe in magic anymore." "Magic or skill, it's still yours," Frank told her. "The fire took your building, not your talent." Lila learned that Frank had been born in Texas, that he had cowboyed his way across the territories for over a decade, that he had never been married and never planned to be. "I like my freedom too much," he said, though even as the words left his mouth, they felt less true than they once had. "I go where the work is, stay as long as it suits me, move on when I get restless." "That sounds lonely," Lila said. Frank had never thought of it that way before, but something in her tone made him reconsider. "Maybe it is," he admitted, "but it's what I know." When the lumber arrived, Frank began work in earnest. He had decided to start with the kitchen first, reasoning that getting Lila's baking operation functional again was the priority. Everything else, the shop front, the living quarters, could come later, but if she could start baking and selling goods, she could begin earning money again. He worked from sunup to sundown, measuring and cutting, hammering and sawing. The foundation was still solid, which saved considerable time and expense. He built a wooden frame structure on top of it, constructing walls and a roof that would house the kitchen workspace. Lila helped however she could, though Frank insisted she take it easy given her injuries. She had burned her hands trying to salvage things from the fire, and her lungs had been damaged by smoke inhalation. Still, she refused to simply watch. She handed him tools, held boards steady while he nailed them, fetched water when he got thirsty. They developed an easy rhythm, working together as if they had been doing so for years rather than days. The town watched with interest as the kitchen began to take shape. People stopped by to offer encouragement, to bring lemonade and sandwiches, to marvel at Frank's craftsmanship. He was building everything by hand, taking care with each joint and corner, making it sturdy and functional. He installed large windows to provide plenty of natural light and ventilation, essential for the hot work of baking. He built long counters at the perfect height for kneading dough. He designed shelving to hold supplies and baking equipment. He even constructed a ventilation system for the oven, carefully positioning it to draw smoke and heat outside. "You have a real gift for this," Lila said one evening as they stood back and surveyed the day's progress. The basic structure was complete, and Frank had begun work on the interior details. "You should consider doing this professionally, construction work, instead of cowboying." Frank shrugged, uncomfortable with praise. "I just build what's needed, nothing fancy about it." "It's more than just building," Lila insisted. "You design with purpose. Everything you've made is exactly what I need for baking. The counter height, the window placement, even the way you've arranged the space for workflow. You understand what I need before I even ask." "I pay attention," Frank said simply. "I watch how you move, how you work. It only makes sense to build around that." Something in Lila's expression shifted, softened. "You've been paying attention to me." Frank felt heat rise in his face that had nothing to do with the weather. "Well, yes. How else would I know what you need?" She smiled then, the first genuine smile he had seen from her since the fire. It transformed her face, chasing away some of the grief and exhaustion, and Frank felt his heart do something unexpected in his chest. He turned away quickly, making a show of checking his tools. As the work continued, Frank found himself looking forward to each day in a way he never had before. He had always enjoyed the satisfaction of physical labor, of building something tangible and useful, but this was different. This was about more than construction. He caught himself noticing small things about Lila. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was concentrating, the little humming sound she made when she was pleased with something, the resilience in her eyes even when he knew she must be exhausted and heartbroken. She was beautiful, yes, but it was more than that. She was strong and kind and determined, and being near her made him want to be a better man. 3 weeks into the construction, Frank realized he was in trouble. He had stopped by the boarding house to discuss some design questions with Lila, and Mrs. Patterson had informed him that Lila was resting because she had overexerted herself. Concerned, Frank had insisted on waiting, and when Lila finally emerged looking pale and tired, his first instinct had been to scoop her up and carry her back to bed himself. The intensity of that protective urge had startled him. He was falling for her, and falling hard, which was possibly the most inconvenient thing that could happen given their circumstances. Lila was a widow, still grieving her husband. She had made it clear that Thomas had been the love of her life, and Frank would not presume to try to replace him. Moreover, Lila was trying to rebuild her entire existence, and the last thing she needed was some cowboy with romantic notions complicating matters. Frank resolved to keep his feelings to himself, to focus on finishing the kitchen, and then to gracefully exit her life before he made a fool of himself. But intention and reality proved to be two different things entirely. It happened on a Sunday afternoon in September. The kitchen was nearly complete, just some finishing touches remaining. Frank had been installing the final cabinet doors when Lila had arrived with a basket of food. They often shared meals during work breaks, but today she had brought something special. A pie made using the boarding house kitchen, her first attempt at baking since the fire. "I wanted to test if I could still do it," she said nervously, as Frank washed his hands at the new pump sink he had installed. "If I've still got the touch." They sat on the new kitchen's front steps, the structure gleaming fresh and new behind them. Frank took a bite of the pie, apple with cinnamon, and closed his eyes. It was the best thing he had ever tasted, perfect in every way, sweet and tart and spiced just right. "Lila," he said seriously, "if you could not bake anymore, the world would be a darker place." She laughed, and the sound was like music. They ate the entire pie between them, talking and joking, and for a little while it felt like they were just two people enjoying a Sunday afternoon rather than a widow and a cowboy brought together by tragedy. When the pie was gone and the sun was starting to sink toward the western mountains, Frank stood to leave, but Lila caught his hand. "Stay a little longer," she said softly. "Please." So he stayed, and they watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple and red. The silence between them was comfortable, easy, and Frank found himself intensely aware of her hand still holding his. Finally, she spoke. "I've been thinking about what happens after the kitchen is finished," Lila said. "I'll need to start baking again immediately to begin earning money. But I've also been thinking about the rest of the building, the shop front and the living quarters. I can't afford to hire anyone to complete the work, and I can't do it myself. I was wondering if you might consider staying on, continuing the project. I still have no money to pay you, but I could provide meals, and once the bakery is profitable again, we could work out terms." Frank's heart was pounding. Staying meant more time with her, more opportunities to fall deeper into feelings he should not have. But leaving meant never seeing her again, and he found he could not bear that thought. "I'll stay," he said, "for as long as you need." Lila squeezed his hand, and when he looked at her, there were tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Frank, for everything. I don't know what I would have done without you. You've given me hope again." Unable to help himself, Frank reached up and gently wiped away a tear from her cheek with his thumb. The gesture was intimate, too intimate, and he started to pull away, but Lila leaned into his touch. For a moment they stayed frozen like that, her cheek in his palm, their eyes locked, and Frank saw something in her expression that made his breath catch. Then she pulled back, looking flustered. "I should get back to the boarding house," she said quickly. "Mrs. Patterson will wonder where I am." Frank walked her back through the darkening streets, neither of them speaking, the air between them charged with something unnamed. At the boarding house door, Lila turned to him. "Tomorrow we can discuss the shop front design," she said, her voice not quite steady. "Tomorrow," Frank agreed. He watched her go inside, then walked back to where his horse was stabled, his mind racing. Something had shifted between them tonight, something significant, and he had no idea what to do about it. He was falling in love with Lila Zimmerman, and he was starting to suspect that maybe, just maybe, she might be developing feelings for him too. But was it too soon? Was she ready? Was he presuming too much? The next morning, Frank arrived at the construction site to find Lila already there, standing in the completed kitchen with a look of wonder on her face. She had a key in her hand, which Frank had given her the day before. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted. "I came here before dawn just to stand in the space you built. Frank, it's perfect. It's everything I need and more. You've given me back my livelihood. You'll make it into something special," Frank said. "I just provided the structure." They spent that day planning the shop front. Frank sketched various designs while Lila described what she wanted. A large front window to display baked goods, a counter for transactions, space for a few small tables where customers could sit and enjoy their purchases. They debated details, argued good-naturedly about door placement, and slowly a vision emerged that satisfied them both. As the weeks passed and the shop front took shape, they fell into a pattern that felt almost domestic. Lila would arrive each morning with breakfast, often experimenting with new recipes using the boarding house kitchen. They would eat together, then work through the morning. At midday, she would return with lunch, and they would rest in the shade while discussing the afternoon's tasks. In the evenings, they would walk together back toward town, talking about everything and nothing, learning each other's stories and dreams. Frank learned that Lila had always wanted children but had not been blessed with any during her marriage. "Thomas and I tried for years," she said one evening. "We had hoped, prayed, but it never happened. The doctor said perhaps it was not meant to be." Frank told her about his childhood in Texas, about learning to ride before he could walk, about the fever that had taken his parents when he was 17. "I've been on my own ever since," he said. "I had an older brother, but he headed to California and I never heard from him again. I suppose I could try to find him, but so much time has passed. He's probably got his own life now." "Do you ever get lonely?" Lila asked. "I used to think I did not," Frank admitted. "But being here, spending time with you, I realize I've been lonely for years and just did not know it." Lila was quiet for a moment. "I've been lonely too, even before Thomas died. He was sick for so long and I was his caregiver more than his wife in those final months. I've been lonely since the fire, feeling like I lost my purpose along with my building. But these weeks working with you, I've felt less alone than I have in a very long time." They stopped walking and looked at each other in the gathering dusk. Frank wanted desperately to kiss her, to tell her everything he was feeling, but he held back. It was too soon, she was still mourning, he needed to be patient, but Lila apparently had other ideas. "Frank," she said softly, "I need to tell you something. I've been thinking about us, about what's happening between us." His heart hammered against his ribs. "Lila, you don't have to say anything. I know your situation, I understand that you're still grieving your husband, and I don't want to presume anything or make you uncomfortable." "Let me finish," she interrupted gently. "I love Thomas. I will always love him and treasure the years we had together. But he's gone, and I'm still here, still living. These past weeks with you have reminded me that I'm still alive, that I can still feel joy and hope. I've felt something growing between us, and I don't think I'm imagining it." "You're not," Frank said, his voice rough with emotion. I've been falling in love with you since the night of the fire, though I did not realize it until recently. I've been trying to keep it to myself because I didn't want to burden you or rush you or make you feel pressured in any way." Tears were streaming down Lila's face now. "I've been falling in love with you too. It scared me at first because I felt like I was betraying Thomas's memory. But I've been talking to Reverend Mitchell about it, and he helped me understand that loving again does not diminish what I had before. The heart has infinite capacity for love." Frank reached for her then, cupping her face in his work-roughened hands. "Lila, are you sure? I'm just a cowboy with nothing to offer you but hard work and honest affection. I don't have much in the way of prospects or wealth. You built me a kitchen with your bare hands," she said, smiling through her tears. "You gave me back my future. You've been kind and patient and good. I don't need wealth or prospects, Frank. I need someone who sees me, who values me, who makes me feel like myself again. You've done all that and more. Can I kiss you?" Frank asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I wish you would," Lila replied. He kissed her there in the street as the stars came out overhead, and it felt like coming home. Her lips were soft and warm, and she tasted like cinnamon and hope. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Frank rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said. "I know it's fast. I know we haven't known each other long, but I love you with everything I am." "I love you too," Lila whispered back. "And you're right, it is fast, but when you've lost everything the way I did, you learn not to waste time on doubt. Life is too precious and too short. I know what I feel, and I feel love for you." They walked back to the boarding house hand in hand, making no secret of their relationship. And if anyone in town was surprised by this development, they were kind enough not to say so. In fact, when Frank arrived at the construction site the next morning, he found several townspeople waiting there with knowing smiles. The mercantile owner, Prout, stepped forward. "Word's gotten around about you and Lila," he said, and Frank tensed, ready to defend their relationship. But Prout was smiling. "We just wanted to say we're happy for you both. Lila's been through hell, and you've been a blessing to her and to this whole town. We took up another collection, and we'd like to contribute to finishing the rest of the building. It's not much, just $83, but it should help with supplies." Frank was overwhelmed. "That's generous, truly, but I can manage the costs." "We know you can," said Mrs. Patterson, who had apparently been part of the group. "But you shouldn't have to. You've given your time and your savings for months now. Let us help. This town takes care of its own, and you've become one of us." When Lila arrived and learned about the collection, she wept openly. Together, she and Frank thanked everyone, and that day several men from town volunteered their labor as well. What had been a solo project became a community effort. With more hands helping, the work progressed rapidly. The shop front was completed within 2 weeks, with its large display window and sturdy counter and small seating area. The upstairs living quarters took longer, but by early November they were finished too. A small bedroom, a sitting room, a washroom with an indoor pump. Simple but comfortable. Throughout the construction, Frank and Lila's relationship deepened. They were openly courting now, and tongues wagged about how quickly the widow had moved on, but most people were supportive. Reverend Mitchell, who had counseled Lila through her grief, publicly endorsed the match, which silenced most of the gossips. Frank had moved beyond simply being in love. He was planning a future. He wanted to marry Lila, to make a life with her, to fill that building with love and laughter and maybe, if they were blessed, children. But he was also aware that Lila might need more time. They had known each other only 3 months, and she had been widowed less than a year. So he resolved to be patient, to let her set the pace. It was Lila who brought up marriage first. They were standing in the completed bakery, now fully furnished and ready to open. The ovens had been installed and tested. The shelves were stocked with baking supplies purchased with the town collection, and some credit extended by Prout. The display window was sparkling clean and waiting to be filled with goods. It was late evening and they were alone, standing in the soft glow of lamplight. "I want to reopen in 3 days," Lila said. "On Friday, November 16th. It will be exactly 3 months since the fire." "That's fitting," Frank agreed. "A new beginning." "I've been thinking about new beginnings," Lila said, turning to face him. "About what comes next. This building isn't just a bakery anymore, Frank. It's our building. You put as much of yourself into it as I did into the original. More, maybe. I want you to be part of it, part of my life, permanently." Frank's heart raced. "What are you saying, Lila?" "I'm saying marry me," she said, her eyes bright with emotion. "I know it's unconventional for the woman to propose, and I know we haven't been courting long, but I'm certain about what I feel. I love you, Frank Zeller. I want to spend my life with you. I want to wake up in that bedroom upstairs with you beside me. I want to run this bakery with you as my partner. I want to build a future together. So what do you say? Will you marry me?" Frank felt like his chest might explode with happiness. "Yes," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Yes, 1,000 times yes. I was trying to work up the courage to propose to you myself, but you beat me to it. I love you, Lila. I want everything you just described. I want to be your husband, your partner, your love for the rest of my days." He kissed her deeply, and she melted into him, her arms wrapping around his neck. When they broke apart, both were laughing and crying at the same time. "How soon can we get married?" Frank asked. "Because I don't want to wait any longer than necessary." "Reverend Mitchell could marry us whenever we want," Lila said. "What about Sunday? That gives us 2 days to prepare." "Sunday is perfect," Frank agreed. They were married that Sunday morning in the small Jerome Junction church with the entire town in attendance. Lila wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Patterson had helped her make, and Frank wore his best shirt and pants, freshly cleaned and pressed. He had even gotten a haircut and shaved, wanting to look his best for his bride. When Lila walked down the aisle toward him, Frank felt tears prick his eyes. She was radiant, her smile bright enough to light the whole church, and he could not believe his fortune that this incredible woman was choosing to spend her life with him. The ceremony was brief, but heartfelt. Reverend Mitchell spoke about love rising from ashes, about new beginnings, about the blessing of finding love twice in one lifetime. When it came time for vows, Frank spoke from his heart. "Lila, when I rode into town that night and saw your life burning down, I never imagined that helping you would lead me here. But I'm grateful for every moment that brought us together. You've taught me what it means to be brave, to rebuild, to hope even when everything seems lost. I promise to love you faithfully, to work by your side, to support your dreams and build new ones with you. I promise to be your partner in all things, for the rest of my life." Lila's voice was steady despite her tears. "Frank, you appeared in my darkest hour like an answer to prayers I did not even know I was praying. You gave me back my livelihood, yes, but more importantly, you gave me back my will to live, to hope, to love again. You showed me that endings can become beginnings, that loss can transform into gain. I promise to love you completely, to build a life with you filled with joy and purpose, to be your wife in every sense of that word, today and always." When Reverend Mitchell pronounced them husband and wife, Frank kissed Lila with all the love in his heart, and the congregation erupted in applause and cheers. The reception was held in the new bakery, which seemed fitting. Lila had stayed up late the previous 2 nights baking, and the display case was filled with bread and rolls and pastries and cakes. She had insisted on providing the food for her own wedding, and the result was a feast that people would talk about for years. Frank stood with his arm around his wife, greeting well-wishers and accepting congratulations, feeling happier than he had ever imagined possible. That night, they climbed the stairs to their bedroom in their building, now truly their home. Frank carried Lila over the threshold, which made her laugh, and they stood together in the small room looking out the window at Jerome Junction's quiet streets. "This is our life now," Lila said softly. "Our home, our business, our future." "It's everything I never knew I wanted," Frank replied, holding her close. "I spent so many years drifting, never putting down roots, and now I cannot imagine being anywhere but here with you." They made love for the first time as husband and wife, tender and passionate, discovering each other with wonder and care. Afterward, lying in each other's arms, they talked late into the night about their plans and dreams. They would run the bakery together, with Lila handling the baking and Frank managing repairs, deliveries, and the business side of things. Maybe eventually they could expand, hire help, grow the operation. Maybe they would be blessed with children to fill the rooms with laughter. But even if it was just the two of them, that would be enough. They had each other, and that was everything. The bakery reopened the following Friday to tremendous fanfare. People lined up before dawn, eager to taste Lila's baking again and to see the new building that had risen from the ashes. Frank worked the counter while Lila baked in the back, and they sold out of everything by noon. It was exhausting and exhilarating, and that night they collapsed into bed, exhausted but happy. The weeks that followed established a rhythm to their life. They would wake before dawn, and while Lila started the baking, Frank would stoke the ovens and prepare the shop for opening. By the time the first customers arrived, the bakery would be filled with the intoxicating aroma of fresh bread. They would work through the morning, with Frank handling sales and Lila continuously producing baked goods. Midday would bring a brief rest, and they would eat lunch together in their upstairs living quarters, often returning to bed for stolen moments of intimacy before the afternoon customers arrived. Evenings were for cleaning up, preparing for the next day, and enjoying each other's company in the quiet of their home. As winter settled over Arizona territory, business remained steady. The bakery had become profitable again, and Lila insisted on beginning to repay Frank for the money he had spent on construction. He protested, arguing that what was hers was his now that they were married, but she insisted they at least keep track of it. "You gave up your savings for me," she said. "The least I can do is pay you back." "How about this?" Frank suggested. "Instead of paying me back, we invest that money in expanding the bakery. We could hire someone to help with the baking, which would ease the workload on you. Or we could start offering more products, maybe simple lunch items to go with the baked goods." Lila considered this. "I like that idea. There's a young woman, Emma, who's been asking if we need help. She's eager to learn baking. We could teach her, and having an extra pair of hands would allow us to increase production." They hired Emma the following week, and she proved to be a quick learner and hard worker. With her help, the bakery was able to extend its hours and offer more variety. Business improved even more, and by spring of 1884 they were prospering beyond what Lila had achieved even before the fire. But the greatest joy came in late spring when Lila began feeling ill in the mornings. The town doctor, old Henderson, confirmed what they had hoped. Lila was pregnant. Frank was overjoyed, and Lila was radiant despite her morning sickness. They had both wanted children, though Lila had worried it might not be possible given her age and history. But here was a miracle, new life growing within her, a symbol of their love and their future. "Our child will be born in this building," Lila said, her hand on her still flat stomach. The building you made with your own hands. There's something poetic about that. Frank kissed her forehead. Everything about us is poetic. We're a love story that started with fire and ashes and became something beautiful. As Lila's pregnancy progressed, Frank became almost comically protective. He insisted she rest more, work less, let Emma handle more of the baking. Lila protested that she was pregnant, not invalid, but secretly she was touched by his concern. They prepared the small spare room upstairs as a nursery, with Frank building a cradle from scratch, carved with delicate designs. He poured his love into every detail, determined that their child would have the best he could provide. Their son was born on a cold December night, 3 days before Christmas, 1884. The labor was long and difficult, and Frank paced outside the bedroom door while Mrs. Patterson and the doctor attended to Lila inside. When he finally heard the baby's cry, he nearly broke down the door in his haste to get inside. Lila was exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "Meet your son," she said, her voice tired but filled with joy. Frank approached slowly, almost reverently. The baby was tiny and perfect, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would probably change color but for now were a deep blue. When the infant wrapped his tiny hand around Frank's finger, he felt his heart expand in ways he had not known were possible. "What should we name him?" Lila asked. They had discussed names but had not decided. Frank thought for a moment. "What about Thomas? After your first husband, he was part of your journey and I want to honor that." Lila's eyes filled with tears. "Frank, that's beautiful, but are you sure? I don't want you to feel like you're in his shadow." "I'm not," Frank said firmly. "Thomas was your past and he helped make you who you are. I'm your present and your future, but I'm secure enough in your love to honor where you came from. Besides, if not for his dream of opening a bakery, you never would have been in Jerome Junction and we never would have met. In a way, I owe him everything." So they named their son Thomas Frank Zeller, called Tommy from the start. Frank took to fatherhood with the same dedication he brought to everything else. He would wake in the night when Tommy cried, bringing the baby to Lila for feeding, then walking him back to sleep afterward. He changed diapers without complaint, sang lullabies in his rough voice, and could be found at all hours simply holding his son and marveling at the miracle of him. The bakery continued to thrive. Emma had become a skilled baker in her own right, and they hired another young woman to help in the shop. This allowed Lila to reduce her hours and spend more time with Tommy while still maintaining the quality and output that had made the bakery successful. Frank had largely transitioned from occasional cowboy work to full-time business management, and he discovered he had a knack for it. He negotiated contracts with local ranches to provide bread and baked goods, expanded their delivery routes, and even began discussing with Lila the possibility of opening a second location someday. Who would have thought a drifter cowboy would become a successful businessman? Lila teased him one evening as they sat together watching Tommy sleep in his cradle. "Who would have thought a widow who lost everything would rebuild an even better life?" Frank countered. "We're both full of surprises." "The best surprise was finding each other," Lila said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Out of tragedy came the greatest blessing of my life." Frank kissed the top of her head. "I used to think I was content being alone, just me and my horse and the open range. I had no idea what I was missing. You and Tommy, this life we've built, it's everything I never knew I needed. You saved me just as much as I saved you." As Tommy grew from infant to toddler, the bakery became his playground. He would toddle around the kitchen while Lila baked, leaving floury handprints on everything. Frank built him a small wooden horse that Tommy dragged everywhere, and he taught his son to feed the chickens they now kept behind the building for fresh eggs. Jerome Junction had truly become home in every sense of the word. In the summer of 1886, Lila discovered she was pregnant again. This time there was less anxiety and more excitement. Tommy was nearly 2 years old, walking and talking up a storm, and the prospect of a sibling delighted him even though he did not quite understand what it meant. Their daughter was born in early spring of 1887, an easier birth than Tommy's had been. They named her Clara Rose, and she had Lila's dark eyes and Frank's stubborn chin. With 2 children and a thriving business, their lives were full to bursting. Frank had to expand their living quarters, adding another bedroom and enlarging the sitting room. He joked that he was constantly building, that he could never quite stop improving and expanding, but Lila knew it was because he poured his love into every nail he hammered, every board he cut. Building was his language of affection, his way of caring for his family. One evening when Clara was about 6 months old and Tommy was 3, Frank and Lila stood together in the bakery after closing. The children were upstairs with Mrs. Patterson, who often helped with childcare in exchange for fresh baked goods. The shop was quiet, clean, ready for the next day's business. "You remember what this looked like after the fire?" Lila asked, looking around at the successful business that surrounded them. "Nothing but ash and ruins and broken dreams." "I remember," Frank said, putting his arm around her waist. "I remember a woman who refused to give up, who had the strength to accept help and the courage to love again. I remember deciding to help a stranger and finding my purpose." "We've come so far," Lila said softly. "Built so much, not just this building but a whole life together. Sometimes I wake up and have to remind myself it's real, that I really am this happy." "It's real," Frank assured her. "Every bit of it. The bakery, the children, our love, all real and all ours." "Do you ever miss it?" Lila asked. "The cowboy life, the freedom, the wandering?" Frank considered the question seriously. He would not dishonor her by lying. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it," he admitted. "Life was easier when it was just me and my horse and no responsibilities beyond the next job. But I don't miss the loneliness, and I don't miss the emptiness. What I have now, what we have together, it's worth every sacrifice 100 times over. This is where I'm meant to be." Lila turned in his arms to face him. "I never thought I could love again after Thomas died. I thought that part of my life was over, that I would spend the rest of my years alone, running the bakery in his memory. And then you appeared, this quiet cowboy who just wanted to help, and you changed everything. You gave me back my life, Frank, but more than that, you gave me a new life, a better one. I love you so much it sometimes scares me." "Don't be scared," Frank said, cupping her face in his hands. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm yours for the rest of my days, come what may." They kissed there in the empty bakery, surrounded by the fruits of their labor and their love, and it felt like a renewal of their vows. Whatever challenges the future might bring, they would face them together, as they had faced everything since that terrible night when fire had changed both their lives. The years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. Tommy grew into a curious, energetic boy who loved helping his father with carpentry projects and riding the old mare Frank kept stabled behind the bakery. Clara grew into a sweet, determined little girl who preferred helping her mother in the kitchen and had inherited Lila's talent for baking. In 1889, they had another son, James, and in 1891, twin girls, Mary and Ruth. Their home was full of noise and chaos and love, and both Frank and Lila thrived in it. The bakery expanded twice more, eventually taking over the adjacent building when the seamstress who rented it retired. They added a proper dining area and began serving simple meals in addition to baked goods. Frank hired a carpenter's apprentice and began taking on construction projects around Jerome Junction in his spare time, building his reputation as a master craftsman. Lila published a small cookbook of her recipes that sold well locally and brought customers from as far as Prescott and even Phoenix. Through it all, their love remained the foundation of everything. They made time for each other despite the demands of business and children, taking evening walks when the weather allowed, stealing kisses in the kitchen between customers, making love with the same passion they had brought to their wedding night years before. They argued sometimes, as all couples do, usually about business decisions or how to handle a child's misbehavior, but they always resolved their disagreements with respect and compromise. On their 10th wedding anniversary in November of 1893, Frank arranged for Mrs. Patterson to watch the children overnight, the first time they had been alone together in years. He took Lila to a small hotel in Prescott, where they had a fancy dinner, and spent the night in a room with a real bathtub and clean linens. It felt like a honeymoon, a chance to remember they were not just business partners and parents but husband and wife, lovers, best friends. 10 years, Lila marveled as they lay together in the comfortable hotel bed. It's gone so fast, and yet I can barely remember what life was like before you. I can remember exactly, Frank said. It was empty. I was existing, not living. You taught me the difference. We taught each other, Lila corrected. I was drowning in grief and loss, and you threw me a lifeline, but you were drowning too in loneliness and aimlessness. We saved each other, Frank. That's what makes us work so well. In 1895, their oldest son Tommy, now 11 years old, announced he wanted to learn baking properly and maybe take over the business someday. Frank felt a surge of pride and also a touch of melancholy. His children were growing up, becoming their own people, and while he was proud of the young man Tommy was becoming, he also mourned the baby who used to fall asleep on his chest. But such was life, the constant cycle of growth and change, and Frank had learned to embrace it rather than resist it. Clara, now 8, had become Lila's shadow in the kitchen, and she could already make bread that rivaled her mother's. The younger children were still little terrors, running wild and keeping both parents constantly busy, but Frank and Lila had learned to accept the chaos as part of the joy of a large family. In the spring of 1896, Frank found Lila sitting alone in the bakery late one night, long after closing. She was looking at an old photograph, one of the few possessions that had not burned in the fire because it had been at the photographer's shop being cleaned. It showed Lila and Thomas on their wedding day, both young and hopeful. "I was thinking about him today," Lila said as Frank sat beside her. "Thomas, it's been 13 years since he died, and sometimes I go weeks without thinking of him at all. Then I feel guilty, like I'm betraying his memory by being so happy with you." Frank took her hand. "Love isn't betrayal. You're allowed to move on while still honoring what came before. Thomas was your first love, and that's sacred. But I'm your second love, and that's sacred too. There's room in your heart for both of us, room in your life for all the chapters of your story." Lila wiped her eyes. "You're a wise man, Frank Zeller. How did a simple cowboy get to be so wise?" "Loving you has made me better in every way," Frank said simply. "Besides, I'm not that simple cowboy anymore. I'm a husband, a father, a businessman, a carpenter. I'm whoever I need to be for my family." "You're my hero," Lila said. "You always have been, from the night you rode into town and fought the fire. You've been saving me every day since, in big ways and small." "We save each other," Frank said, echoing her words from years before. "That's what marriage is, I think. Constant mutual rescue from whatever threatens our happiness. We're partners, Lila, equal partners in everything. In 1898, as the century drew toward its close, Frank and Lila celebrated 15 years of marriage. Their children ranged in age from 7 to 14, and the bakery had become an institution in Jerome Junction. People came from all over the territory to taste Lila's famous sweet rolls and to purchase loaves of her perfect bread. Frank's construction business had grown to the point where he employed 3 full-time carpenters and had projects booked months in advance. They had built not just a life but a legacy. On a warm September evening, the whole family gathered in the bakery's dining area for a special dinner. All 5 children were there, cleaned up and on their best behavior for once. Frank and Lila sat at the head of the table, looking at the beautiful family they had created, and felt overwhelming gratitude. "I want to say something," Tommy announced, standing up with the awkward formality of a teenage boy trying to be grown up. "Ma, Pa, I just want to say thank you for everything you've given us, for the life you've built, for showing us what love and hard work can accomplish. I'm proud to be your son." The other children echoed his sentiments, even the twins who were still young enough to be embarrassed by emotion. Frank felt his eyes prickle with tears, and when he looked at Lila, she was crying openly. "We're the ones who should be thankful," Lila managed to say. "You 5 are the greatest blessing of our lives. Everything we've done has been for you to give you a better life than we had." "You've done that and more," Clara said quietly. "You've given us a home filled with love. That's worth more than anything." After dinner, after the children had been sent to bed, Frank and Lila stood on the front step of the bakery, looking out at Jerome Junction's peaceful streets. The building that Frank had built by hand 15 years ago had been expanded and improved over the years, but its bones were still the same, still sturdy and strong. "You ever think about that night?" Frank asked. "The night of the fire?" "Sometimes," Lila admitted. "Usually when I'm counting my blessings. That fire destroyed my old life, but it made room for something so much better. If it hadn't happened, we never would have met. I would have lived my life as Thomas's widow, probably remarried eventually out of practicality rather than love, never knowing what I was missing. That fire was terrible, but it brought me you, and I can't regret anything that led me here. I think about it often," Frank confessed. "I think about how easily I could have ridden past the town that night, how I almost stayed on the trail instead of investigating the fire. One different choice and our whole lives would have been different. We never would have met, never would have fallen in love, never would have had our children. It's humbling to realize how much can hinge on a single moment, a single decision." "But you did investigate," Lila said. "You did help. And you kept helping day after day, week after week, until helping me became your life's purpose. You're the best man I've ever known, Frank Zeller, and I thank God every day that you rode into Jerome Junction that night." Frank pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "I love you, Lila. Today, tomorrow, forever. You and our children are my everything." "I love you too," she whispered against his chest. "My hero, my partner, my love." They stood there for a long time, 2 people who had found each other in the aftermath of disaster and built something beautiful from the ashes. The bakery stood solid behind them, a testament to Frank's skill and dedication. Their children slept peacefully upstairs, safe and loved. And tomorrow would bring another day of work and joy and the 1,000 small moments that made up a life. As the new century approached, Frank and Lila's story became something of a legend in Jerome Junction. People told the tale of the cowboy who built a kitchen by hand for a widow who had lost everything, and how that act of kindness had blossomed into a love story for the ages. Young couples would visit the bakery hoping some of that magic would rub off on them. Travelers would stop in just to see the place where such devotion had built not just a building but a life. But to Frank and Lila, it was not a legend or a story. It was simply their life, the daily reality of work and love and family that they had created together. They had faced tragedy and triumph, loss and gain, and through it all, they had held fast to each other. In the early spring of 1899, as the 19th century gave way to the 20th, Frank and Lila took a rare day off from the bakery. They left the business in the capable hands of Tommy and Emma, now fully trained bakers, and rode out into the desert on the old mare and a borrowed gelding. They found a spot overlooking the Verde Valley, with a view of the distant mountains and the endless Arizona sky. 16 years ago I had nothing, Lila said, dismounting and spreading a blanket on the ground. No husband, no home, no hope, and now look at me, look at us. Frank helped her sit, then settled beside her. You had more than nothing. You had strength and resilience and talent. All I did was provide the opportunity for you to rebuild. You provided so much more than that, Lila insisted. You provided love and partnership and a reason to keep going. Without you, I might have rebuilt the bakery eventually, but my life would have been hollow. You filled it with meaning and joy. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the clouds drift across the sky. Frank thought about his journey, from orphaned Texas boy to wandering cowboy to settled family man and successful businessman. Every step had led him to this moment, to this woman, to this life. He would not change a single thing. You have any regrets? Lila asked, as if reading his mind. Frank considered carefully. I regret that I didn't meet you sooner. I regret all those years I spent alone when I could have been with you. But I don't regret the path that led me to you, because every experience made me into the man you fell in love with. So no real regrets. You. None, Lila said firmly. I love Thomas and I'm grateful for the years I had with him. But losing him led me to you, and my life with you has been richer than I ever imagined possible. I wouldn't change anything either. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red that reminded Frank of that long-ago fire, they mounted their horses and rode back toward Jerome Junction. The town appeared on the horizon, small and dusty and perfect, and Frank felt a swell of affection for this place that had become his home. Their children were waiting when they arrived home, gathered around the dinner table in the apartment upstairs. Emma had helped them prepare a meal, and the whole family ate together, laughing and talking and enjoying each other's company. After dinner, Frank sat in his favorite chair with little Ruth on his lap while Lila read aloud from a book. Tommy and James were arm wrestling in the corner, Clara was helping Mary with her letters, and the apartment was filled with the warm chaos of family life. This was everything, Frank thought. This moment, this family, this life. He had built Lila a kitchen with his hands, but she had built him a home with her heart. Together they had created something that would outlast them both. A legacy of love and hard work, a family that would carry their story into the future, a business that served the community and brought joy to countless people. As the children were being put to bed and the apartment grew quiet, Frank stood at the window looking down at the bakery. The sign above the door read, Zeller's Bakery now, changed from the original Zimmerman's the year after they had married. But in Frank's mind, it would always be Lila's bakery first and foremost, the dream she had built with Thomas and rebuilt with Frank, the heart of their shared life. Lila came to stand beside him, slipping her hand into his. "What are you thinking about? How lucky I am," Frank said simply. "How grateful. We're both lucky," Lila said. "We found each other when we both needed saving. That's not luck, that's fate." Frank turned to kiss her, and it was as sweet and meaningful as their first kiss all those years ago. "I love you, Lila Zeller. Thank you for saying yes when you could have said no. Thank you for taking a chance on a drifting cowboy with nothing to offer but his hands and his heart. Your hands built me a kitchen, Lila said, smiling up at him. Your heart built me a home. That's everything, Frank. That's more than enough. They went to bed that night wrapped in each other's arms, secure in their love and the life they had built. Outside, Jerome Junction slept peacefully under the Arizona stars. Inside the bakery apartment, 5 children dreamed their own dreams, safe and loved. And in the master bedroom, 2 people who had found each other in fire and chaos lay together in peace and contentment, their story a testament to the power of kindness, the resilience of the human spirit, and the transforming nature of love. Years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and challenges. Tommy eventually took over management of the bakery, with Clara as his partner in the baking. James discovered a talent for carpentry and joined Frank's construction business. The twins, Mary and Ruth, both married local boys and started families of their own, filling Frank and Lila's later years with grandchildren. Through it all, Frank and Lila remained devoted to each other, their love deepening with age rather than fading. They grew old together in the building Frank had built by hand, watching their children grow and their grandchildren play in the same spaces where their own love story had unfolded. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1913, Frank and Lila stood once again in front of the bakery, now managed entirely by the next generation, but still bearing their name. They were in their 60s now, gray-haired and lined with age, but their eyes still held the same love that had sparked all those years ago. 30 years, Frank marveled. It feels like yesterday and forever all at once. The best 30 years of my life, Lila said. Every day with you has been a gift. They had survived and thrived, building not just a business but a dynasty, not just a marriage but a partnership that had become legendary in Jerome Junction. Their story was told and retold, inspiring others to acts of kindness and reminding people that love could rise from even the darkest ashes. As they walked hand in hand back into the bakery, greeted by the smells of fresh bread and the sounds of their grandchildren playing upstairs, Frank reflected on the journey that had brought them here. He had been a lonely cowboy with nothing but a horse and a wandering heart. She had been a widow who had lost everything to fire and grief. Together, they had built a life richer than either could have imagined. The bakery stood strong, a monument to Frank's craftsmanship and Lila's determination. The kitchen he had built by hand still functioned perfectly, producing the bread and pastries that had made their family's fortune. And upstairs, in the rooms where they had raised their children and lived their life, love still resided, as warm and nourishing as the ovens that had been the heart of their business. Frank Zeller and Lila Zimmerman Zeller lived long lives, surrounded by family and respected by their community. They died within months of each other in the early 1920s, Frank at 71 and Lila at 68, having spent over 35 years as husband and wife. They were buried side by side in the Jerome Junction Cemetery, their headstone reading simply, "Together in love, partners in life, united forever." The bakery continued to operate for generations, run by their descendants, always maintaining the same commitment to quality and community that Frank and Lila had established. The building Frank had constructed by hand remained solid and strong, a testament to the love and care he had poured into every board and nail. And in Jerome Junction, their story lived on, passed down from parent to child, a reminder that out of tragedy can come triumph, that love can bloom in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the greatest romances begin with a simple act of kindness from a cowboy who saw a widow in need and decided to build her a kitchen by hand. Their legacy was not just the successful business or the building that still stood decades later. It was the love they had shared, the family they had created, the lives they had touched. Frank had saved Lila from despair by giving her the means to rebuild her livelihood. But Lila had saved Frank from a life of lonely wandering by giving him a reason to stay, a purpose beyond himself, a love that transformed him from a drifter into a devoted husband and father. In the end, they had saved each other, and in doing so, they had created something beautiful and lasting. The fire that destroyed everything Lila had known became the forge in which their love was born, burning away the old to make way for the new. From ashes and loss came hope and love, proving that endings are often just beginnings in disguise, and that the darkest nights can give way to the brightest dawns. Their grandchildren and great-grandchildren would tell the story for years to come, keeping alive the memory of the baker's widow who lost everything in a fire and the cowboy who built her a new kitchen by hand, and in doing so, built a love that would last beyond their lifetimes, inspiring generations to believe in the power of kindness, the resilience of hope, and the eternal nature of true love.